Billionaires are buying up farmland all across America, including Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Ted Turner. These billionaires now own millions of acres of farmland like you see behind me here. This is a farm that's producing corn as well as housing dairy cows. More and more of these farms are now being controlled by billionaires who are buying this land as an investment, everyone. The value of farmland has skyrocketed in America over the last 25 years. The value of an acre of farmland, it's appreciated by, get this, 400%. And you have to wonder, as more and more of these billionaires and as more and more of these other countries come in and buy farmland across America, what's going to happen to the value of this farmland in the future? What's going to happen to the US food supply as well as the water supply? Well, I'm going to answer those questions in this video because this is a big trend that you guys need to be paying attention to. And Bill Gates is one in particular that I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard about. Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, one of the richest men in the world, he now owns over 250,000 acres of farmland across America. He's the 42nd largest landowner in America. So Bill Gates owns more land than pretty much anyone else. There's only 41 people that own more than him. I'm going to talk about them later in this video, the top landowners in America. But in particular, Bill Gates is buying land across 17 different states. And in particular, he has big holdings in Nebraska. He has big holdings in Arizona. He has big holdings in Louisiana. And, you might ask yourself the question, why is Bill Gates buying up all this farmland? And there's a lot of different theories about why Bill Gates is doing that. Some people think that he wants to control the food supply. Some people think that he might want to develop the land or do something else with it. But in reality, according to Bill Gates and the Bill Gates Foundation, the reason they're doing it is an investment, meaning that he's hoping to extract profit from buying the farmland and renting it out to farmers. Jeff Bezos, he's another billionaire who's doing the same thing. Jeff Bezos is the 25th largest landowner in America. He owns over 400,000 acres. And I think what these billionaires are doing is that they're looking at this land, right? And they're seeing its potential to produce food and to produce rent and revenue. When these billionaires, they'll rent out the land to a farmer, often a big conglomerate farmer. But I think what they're doing is they're looking into the long term. They're seeing increased uncertainty in the world. They're seeing geopolitical risk. And so they're saying to themselves, what can we buy that insulates us from that risk? And the answer is they're buying the land that produces our natural resources. So obviously this land can be used to produce corn, soybeans, and wheat. Those are three of the biggest crops in America. In fact, corn and soybeans is over 50% of farmland production. That's most of the revenue that farmers get in America is corn and soybeans. In addition, there's often water underneath this land. Bill Gates in Nebraska, the land he bought there, has a lot of wells and natural aquifers under the land, meaning that he has water that he can tap into. And I think it's all about controlling the food and the water, because when someone does that, they insulate themselves from geopolitical risk. In the case of a war, in the case of rampant inflation, they control the resources that everyone's going to want in those situations. And I'm not going to lie, folks, talking and thinking about this is kind of scary because it causes your mind to go to places that you don't really want it to go, right? Asking these questions about why these billionaires are buying up land. And we're going to talk about even more of these billionaires in a second. Who's number one, who's number two, who's number three on the landowner list. It's some names you're going to recognize. But yeah, it kind of causes you to ask these uncomfortable questions about why are they buying up the land? And then think about the scenario that could happen that would make, owning this land really valuable. It's, things that we don't want to think about. Like I said, war, inflation, basically the destabilization of our society and our world is the reason that these guys are buying up this land. And so, I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but when you investigate this, it causes you to think in those terms. And, as I did research on this topic, everyone, one thing that actually really concerned me was the trends in the number of farms in America. So right now in America, there's 1.9 million farms. And the average farm is around 450 acres. However, back about 80 to 90 years ago, America had over 6 million farms. So we have lost 65% of our farms over the last century. And the reason that's happening is because the small farmer and the medium farmer in America, they have been squeezed out over the last century. It's really hard to run a farm profitably, especially with these uncertain economic times, the swings in commodity prices, and a lot of farmers have just gone out of business. And of course, the flip to that is that more and more of the farmland in America is now being owned by conglomerates and is being farmed by conglomerates. The big, massive agricultural companies, they now control over 50% of the US crop output, while the small farmer is like less than 15% of US crop output. And so we have this kind of concerning combination. The land ownership is getting more concentrated in billionaires' hands and in other countries' hands, while the people who farm the land, the billionaires will rent the land out to these agricultural companies, that's also becoming more concentrated. And so there's kind of being this loss of local and regional autonomy across the US, right? Whether you talk about the Great Plains in America, states like Iowa, Indiana, Southern Illinois, those are actually the highest value farmland areas in America. So if we look at a map of the most valuable farmland in the US, you can see that it's not actually where you would expect it to be. It's in the Midwest, the Great Plains, South Dakota, Iowa. And that's because these are areas where you can produce crops the easiest in terms of corn, soybeans, wheat. The main staple crops that US farmers produce come from those areas. And what we're seeing now is we're also seeing other countries now buy up the farmland. I'm sure you guys have seen the articles on China starting to buy up some land across the US. China went into Florida, went into Iowa, went into some other states and started buying up some land. China has a big population, everyone, and I'm sure they want to control good crop producing arable land across the world. And now we have many people in America concerned about that. And a lot of bills are being introduced to stop countries like China from buying up farmland. The good news so far is that other countries like China and the billionaires, they still own a small percentage of the farmland. In the US, there's 890 million acres of farmland. Bill Gates owns like 0.002% of that. China owns even less than that. So we haven't reached a point yet where these big entities control a big enough share that it'll become a problem, but we're kind of heading in that direction, everyone. There's definitely more consolidation, more concentration occurring. And of course, I'm curious, everyone, do you guys want to own farmland? Do you guys actually want to own a plot of land with some acres that you can, produce some food, some vegetables, maybe have some cattle? There's an interesting actual disparity in America in the value of land, depending on if it's for crops or for pasture or for animals. So cropland farm values are around $5,500 an acre. So if you use that land to produce corn, soybeans, wheat, fruits, vegetables, $5,500 an acre. Conversely, if you use that land as pasture land for cows and sheep and other type of animals, it's worth about $1,900 an acre. So if it's used for pasturing animals, the value is 1/3 lower. And most of the areas in America that are used for pasturing animals are in the mountain region. So Montana, Wyoming, New Mexico, that's where the farmers have all the cows. And not so coincidentally, that's actually where the farmland is worth the least in the mountain states. It's worth the most in the Great Plains where they produce the crops. But now, everyone, I'm going to ask a question here. Is there a bubble in farmland? I know you guys were probably waiting for this take in this video. The value of farmland's gone from $800 an acre to $4,000 an acre. In Iowa, in particular, farmland's gone from like $2,000 an acre to $11,000 an acre. Could we actually be experiencing a bubble? And could these billionaires be making the wrong decision to buy up all this farmland? And the reason I'm asking that question and maybe suspecting that is because the value of farmland is heavily related to the value of crops and commodities. And so one of the reasons why the farmland went up so much in value during the pandemic is because the commodity prices went up so much in value during the pandemic. So the value of corn, the value of wheat, the value of soybeans skyrocketed during the pandemic. I don't know if you guys remember that, 2021, 2022, especially after Russia invaded Ukraine, everything just got way more expensive in terms of food and commodity prices. And those more expensive commodity prices meant that the farmers producing on this land could pay more in rent to the owners of the land, which drove the value of the farmland up. However, now we have the reverse situation occurring, everyone. The value of these crops that the farmers are producing is plummeting. Wheat is down like 50-60% from its pandemic highs. Soybean also plummeting, 30 to 40% decline. Corn plummeting as well. these crops are now almost back to their pre-pandemic pricing, meaning that the farmers farming the land are not making nearly as much money as they were 2 years ago, which means they're not going to be able to pay as high a rent to the owners of the land, like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. And so I'm suspecting potentially that we could be in a bubble here with the farmland valuations, is that the declining crop and commodity prices could lead to a decline in the value of the land underneath. Of course, that's me speculating. We'll have to see what happens. But interestingly, something like this did happen in the 1980s, everyone. In the 1980s, we had like a big bubble in farmland prices. You can actually see in Iowa what happened. There was a big run up in prices. Prices like in the 70s went up 4x of farmland, last period of big inflation. And then in the 80s, the farmland in Iowa went down 60%. The value went down 60% in the 1980s. I don't know if some of you are farmers or remember what happened in the 1980s, but that must have been cataclysmic for the farming community and the farmland owning community back then, especially if people bought with debt. Like actually Bill Gates, he heavily leveraged his land portfolio. He took out over 800 million in loans on his land portfolio in the last couple of years. So a lot of these landowners actually are heavily leveraged. They didn't just buy in cash. They have a lot of debt. And so what happens if you have a lot of debt and then the value of the land goes down? Well, it could be a bad situation. Additionally, there was a national farmland downturn in the 80s as well. Values of farmland went down by about 30% across the US in the 1980s. Could we see something similar occur over the next 5 to 6 years? You know, I'm not an expert on this space. I can't really say for sure, but the declining commodity prices is something you got to watch, because that's the main source of revenue as we look here, right? Main source of revenue. We got corn right here. You see, guys, we got corn all around this area I'm walking around in upstate New York right now. How much is the farmer going to be able to sell that corn for has a huge influence on how much the land underneath it is worth. But of course, everyone, these billionaires probably aren't dumb. You know, I'm sure they've thought about this. And I'm sure a lot of them are buying up the farmland as a long-term play, not just based on the swings in commodity prices over 3 to 4 years. And, you know, in terms of like the people who really own the most land in America, we talked about Bill Gates at number 42, Jeff Bezos at number 25. But the number one landowner in America is actually the Emerson family. Now, I had never heard of them before, but they own over, I think it's over 2 million acres of timberland in the Pacific Northwest. And so they're a logging family, a timber family, and they just own lots of land that they extract timber from. And so they're the number one owner, which I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. Like, you know, family that actually, you know, does something productive with the land. But then you go down the list in the top 5 and you see other names on the list. You see Ted Turner, number 3. This is the number 3 owner of land in America. He owns a lot of land in New Mexico. New Mexico, Ted Turner apparently has luxury hospitality properties out there with lots and lots of land. So Ted Turner is top 5 landowner in the US, as is Stan Kroenke, who you might know is the guy who owns all the sports teams. He owns the LA Rams, the Colorado Avalanche. He also owns Arsenal Football Club over in England. He owns over 1 million acres and he's a rancher. So it's a lot of cattle and ranching on the land that he owns. So fascinating to see this list, everyone. I'm actually gonna have a link to it in the description, the top 100 landowners in America. There's gonna be some names on there that you recognize, some names that you don't. Pretty fascinating to see who owns the land in this country. Now, if you guys wanna do more research on real estate in America, more so related to traditional real estate like houses, for sale houses, do me a favor and go to www.reventure.app. This is the application I created to help you guys as home buyers and investors track the housing market. Unfortunately, I do not yet have data on farmland on Reventure app, but we have data that covers the rest of the residential housing market. You can see data on inventory and price cuts and how overvalued home prices are in your city or neighborhood. Go to www.reventure.app right now and sign up for a premium plan that costs us $39 a month to get access to that data for your city and zip code. Until next time, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is Nick from Reventure signing off.